I'm not generalising, but traditionally, and this is
No, you are generalising.
over
Sydney
many years.
metro versus
One sec.
regional. There's a bit of a facelift happening in Gosford at
Absolutely.
the moment as
Yeah.
well.
And they're
You-
building apartments and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had a customer buy an investment property in Queensland. I can't remember the suburb. The insurance premium was 20 grand a year.
Welcome back to Property Now, where we are on a mission to make you the property pro in your group chat. Today, I sit down with the guys and we discuss property investment strategies for first-timers and whether a rural or urban market make a better investment. We hope you enjoy. All right, team.
What are we talking about this week?
We are talking about property investment and whether capital cities or regional markets are better to invest in. This topic actually comes from a listener question, our first episode from a listener question, which I'm very excited about. So this comes from Jonah on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Jonah, for your comment. So Jonah said, I'm going to read out his comment as well so everybody knows what we're talking about. So he started with, have found your channel a fortnight ago, thoroughly enjoy the content. Thank you. Very pertinent and relatable topics for the younger demographic here in Oz. I did not write this myself, I promise.
Did they say anything about the host and how great she is?
Host is incredible, so relatable, so funny.
It was a long comment as well, by the way.
It was a very long comment. No, he didn't mention me as a host. That's okay. I'll forgive him. As a 29-year-old, I can vouch for the importance of sound financial education at a younger age. Then he goes on to say, and this is where the question bit comes in, would like to hear more thoughts from the panel about whether properties in large cities around Australia, particularly in urban areas, should be considered for investment given their soaring prices, or should the younger generation look more remote, particularly with population expansion, although gains may not be seen in the next 5 years, but rather in 10 plus years? Long question. Lots to unpack. But I thought this was really interesting. And again, selfishly, as someone looking to buy their first property, I'm, interested in what you guys all think as, seasoned property buyers, investors, people with a lot of industry experience. I want to know, what is it as easy as sort of when you're thinking about your property investment strategy, thinking like, would I go capital city? Would I go regional? I think we should, dig into some factors that make either of those markets attractive, look at some data around what is actually a regional market and what is a capital city as well. I mean, I think we all know what a capital city is, but it's the regional markets that I get a little confused by. So let's dig in. I mean, what did you guys think about the question, the comment?
Great question. I agree. Maybe let's define the terms. So, so regional versus capital.
Yes. So one thing I did learn by doing some research is that there are a lot of different definitions. So that there seems to be a bit of, not confusion, but I guess depending on where you look, and if you were someone, starting off your property investment journey research, you would find a lot of different definitions. So PropTrack defines capital cities as all 8 capital cities, and regional areas is basically anything outside of that. All rest of state regions is what they call it. But then if you go onto the AusGov website or the Regional Australia Institute, regional includes all towns, cities and areas outside of Australia's largest capital cities. So they count those as Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth and Canberra. So that leaves out Darwin and Hobart. So that's kind of the difference between those two. And then Chris, I believe you had seen
I agree.
another
There's a lot of
definition
conflicting
still.
data on they call it cities versus regional, or urban/metro versus regional centres. They break it up into inner and outer regions. So it can be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
I've got some notes here as well where it talks about, urban areas being major Australian cities. So Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, which is really interesting. That was from the ABS data. And there's also migration policies which apply, different rules apply for capital cities. So I'll detail what capital cities are, and regional areas. So there's a higher intake or higher demand for migration into some of those regions. But again, the migration side of things relates to Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, classified as urban areas or major cities.
Okay.
Where different policies apply on the migration side of things. So anything outside of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane is, from what we've seen, is potentially classified as a regional town or centre.
Right.
And then there's broken up further into inner inner regional and outer regional, and then you've got remote.
Hold on, so Adelaide and Perth by that definition is regional?
Radelaide.
And Perth.
Yeah, Radelaide, Perth, Darwin.
Yeah.
Anyone. So like when I look at even the Queensland market, I think, Gold Coast, Brisbane.
Yeah.
I know Brisbane is the capital city of Queensland, but you think, you go to Gold Coast lately, it's booming.
Well, that's why these definitions are important. I was in Gold Coast a month ago. Man, expensive.
It feels like a capital city,
It feels
right?
like a city. So if you're saying Gold Coast is regional, but Adelaide is a major city, Gold Coast is more expensive than Adelaide.
Absolutely.
So it's not as simple as maybe capital V regional. You actually really need to break that down and define that.
That's a good point as well. So whether that's regional or capital, the prices of the assets or the properties in that location doesn't dictate whether it's regional or capital. For example, a good example that I can think of is Sydney prices, which is a capital city or an urban area, versus prices in Berry, which, we all know prices in Berry are in New South Wales here are quite expensive. It feels like a beautiful little country town. It's considered regional, but the prices there are more expensive than a lot of the properties here in Sydney.
You could buy something in Blacktown for cheaper than Berry or Bowral, Yeah. There's a lot of discrepancies there, which is interesting to unpack.
Yeah, but it's like, I'm just thinking, is it more around the technical definition of what's regional versus metro, or what people's perception of what's regional metro is? Like what you're talking about with the Gold Coast, you don't think of it as regional.
No, you wouldn't.
And then the demand for property reflects that. So it doesn't matter what the technical definition is, whether it's from the government website or whatever. But I think the driving forces around the demand for the properties and the supply and so forth, and whether it's a good investment opportunity comes from people's perception and their understanding of what that city is. Because I don't think many people think that the Gold Coast is regional. So if you're having this conversation around is it regional versus metro, no one's ever going to think and put Gold Coast or Perth into the regional bucket for that argument to go, yeah, look, you shouldn't buy regional because you shouldn't buy in the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I find interesting.
And I actually like that as well, rather than just classifying it based off migration. If looking for property investment, I actually looked at it a little bit different, where you've got the major city centres, such as Sydney and all those major capitals.
Yeah.
But if you break it down further and the classification of regions, right? So you've got major regional centres like Gosford, Wollongong, Sunshine Coast, Newcastle, Gold Coast, if that's considered region. But then I look at it like you've got the beach town regional side of things. So, places like Byron Bay and Nelson Bay, which is God's country. Hello to everyone in Nelson's Bay. And then you might have mining regional, right? So places like Port Hedland up in Western Australia, or Mount Isa or Broken Hill. I look at particularly for property investment, I think it could be important to look at urban versus regions in the terms of what's happening in that location. Is it a beach town? It's going to be very different in terms of the investment.
Yeah.
Like if it's a beach town, it potentially is a holiday location. It might be a holiday house for yourself, versus if it's in Broken Hill, it could be a mining, or it's more than likely a mining investment, and that has different risks associated with it.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to look at urban versus regional in an investment lens about what's happening, as you're saying, Jason.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that just proves that when you're looking at where to invest, and that's the most popular question, it's showing that there's markets within markets. So first, like the way I look at it is you might look at major trends, regional versus metro, and then out of the regional bucket, you can break that down, like what you're talking about, different types of regions. Yeah. And out of that, those different type of regions, different types of properties, different types of suburbs in those regions. So you will start at the top with regional versus metro, and then you slowly drill down, and I think that's how you work out which area or type of property or type of suburb is suitable for your particular situation.
Yeah, I think you're both starting to get to some really interesting areas as well. So starting at the top as well, you need to define what you actually want out of an investment, right? Yeah. And then some of what you were talking about, Chris, I mean, every area is going to be different. So what makes the beach town more expensive? It's like people want to be near the beach. Yep. So what happened, it's along this New South Wales east, coastline, it's very hard to find affordable beachfront property, right? Whereas 10, 15 years ago, there were pockets, right? But it's just exploded because why people want to be near the beach. Maybe they can't afford northern beaches of Sydney, eastern suburbs of Sydney. They start to move out a bit, right? You see the towns like Berry, Bowral, places like that, they've always been beautiful, amazing, rising in popularity after COVID because people now, maybe they can work from home. So maybe they don't need to live close to the office. Maybe they can live in a leafy country town. So you need to be looking for, as an investor, not only is it regional v metro, but if I'm going regional, what regional areas are popular? What regional areas are people moving to? What's keeping them there? Are there jobs there? Are there hospitals there? Are there schools there? What makes Byron Bay more expensive than, most other places around Australia? It's such a popular destination. There's a lot of celebrities that have bought up there. Like, it's just a great place to be if you don't need to be in the major cities. So, look for those trends.
Some good food up there.
Good food in Byron Bay. Food's number one on the list.
I know food is very close to your heart, Mike.
Well, it is. That's why Berry's so popular. The donut van. That is why prices in Berry. No, I'm only joking.
But no, that donut van is delicious.
It is pretty good. I love that we've all been. Have you been to the Berry donut van?
I have, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Who hasn't?
Like, you always go, I don't know if you go there directly just for it, or it's always on the way to somewhere. It's a stopover. It's a must. You do a detour. Yeah, 100%.
I love the architecture, that beautiful strip.
Yeah.
It's really quite nice.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous little spot.
Exactly
talking
right.
on the split in regional, I think it's also talking on urban and metro. And if we talk just Sydney for now, so you've got Cronulla down the bottom, and then you've got Palm Beach at the top, and then all the way out to the mountains. That's effectively the Sydney basin, call it. And then you've got all the suburbs in between.
Yep.
The saying that, looking at regional and mining versus a beachfront, the same thing can apply in terms of Sydney as well. So a house at Cronulla has a different investment purpose, for example, than a house in, say, Penrith.
Yep.
So that's also something to consider in the urban and metro strategy as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think for all listeners or viewers watching the pod is that if you're thinking about property investment, you really got to define what the goal is what you're trying to achieve, because there's usually two options. So the one is that you're trying to buy properties that's going to give you really good cash flow so that it doesn't take much out of your pocket to hold and maintain that property. Or the other one is that you're looking for capital growth. So, for example, it might be costing you $100, $200 a week to maintain that property. So you're out of pocket, but the property's going up $10,000, $20,000 a year or even more. And your strategy could be using that capital growth to help you use the equity, borrow it, buy a second property, or even sell it in the future to get a big deposit from the proceeds of the profit to help you buy your forever home. Right? So there's all sorts of different goals. Like, you can obviously have both as well.
Very hard.
But yeah, it's pretty hard, I think, to have both.
So, speaking openly, I have my personal strategy. I've never considered regional properties in my personal investment property strategy, and I'll get into some of the reasons. As being an avid investor yourself, Jace, have you considered regional?
Yeah, definitely. So I looked at suburbs like Dubbo, Goulburn around 2019. So when the average house price there was about 300,000 to 350.
Wow.
And the rent was pretty decent. I think from memory it was like 400, 450 a week. So it means that it was pretty easy to maintain, and the interest rates were okay. Like, it wasn't as low as 2% because that was pre-COVID, but I was just not too sure about it. Right? So, because investing property is a long-term game, and I think the question talks about that.
Yeah,
is that just because it's cheap doesn't mean that it's a good investment. Just because there's some infrastructure going in now doesn't mean that there's long-term sustainable infrastructure or plans that's going to maintain the growth of the property. So in the end, I didn't go ahead. But looking at the properties in those two suburbs now,
what's it worth?
550, 600,000.
Yeah. You're saying from 2019?
Yeah, from 2019.
So that was an example of growth plus.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly right.
Income generation.
Exactly right.
Capital growth.
So that's where I think you have to really be confident in your research and the fundamentals. Yeah. Right. So for me personally, I did look at the data, but I wasn't sticking to the fundamentals. So I had that uncertainty to feel that, you know what, I don't know many people that invest in regional suburbs.
Yeah.
Right, for example.
Right.
And I feel that prior to COVID, no one really talked about investing in regional areas. Everyone that I knew that was investing property never invested or bought anything in suburbs like that in regional New South Wales. Like, the topic didn't even come up, but now you're seeing stuff like in the media talking about Albury, Wodonga, Dubbo, Goulburn, all these regional areas, you're seeing articles around the trends in regional areas, how property values have increased, the shift of people moving around.
Why do you think it's becoming a bigger topic now? Why do you think it's becoming more headline and it's becoming more known that regions are a good place to look at?
Well, I really think it's got to do with affordability.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So in talking about this topic, about the argument, do I invest in metro versus regional? I think it often comes down to the budget. So let's say, for example, you've got a budget. You're a young first-time investor. It's $550,000. That's what you can purchase. You're living at home with parents, right? You have saved up a decent deposit. You can use the rental income as part of your borrowing capacity. So that's why you're buying investment property. Mm-hmm. For $550,000, I think the options are quite limited. So let's say, take Sydney, for example. Mostly you're going to be buying one-bedroom apartments or units. Or studios.
And it's out in the outskirts as well.
Exactly right. Yeah. And that might be a good investment in certain suburbs, but I think generally those are not the best types of investment. So then you're automatically going to be looking at, okay, for $550,000, what can I get? So I'll look out into the regional areas because perhaps that's what you read about in the media, talking about regional versus metro, so forth. And then you see this property. It's a 4-bedroom house on 500 square meter block. It's only $500,000. And the rent's decent as well. So I think automatically you'd think, you know what, that's a pretty good investment opportunity compared to a studio or an apartment. But I think that's a trap as well.
But it's interesting what that does to you mentally. So you've got like a 1-bedroom or 1 studio apartment in Surrey Hills for $600, for example. Or you've got a 4 or 5-bedroom, 900 square meter block house in Dubbo for the same price. That kind of affects you mentally about it. Well, hold on. How do you compare the value, right? When one's 4 bedrooms, one's 30 square meters, right?
How is this worth less than that?
And I know the location, right? That's how you compare the value. But the actual, what you get for what you're paying, it's really interesting to dig into that and see how do you actually get to that point.
What are like some other factors that you would consider in like making that decision? Say if you were if you had the budget for both those properties, and I know that, this is disclaimer, like this is not personal advice. This is just general. This is us saying what we would do, hypothetical situation, seek expert advice. But if you were weighing those up, what sort of factors would you think about to help you make that decision? Anyone.
See, my personal strategy has always been, if I can't drive there within 2 to 3 hours, I wouldn't purchase it. And there's a very simple reason for that. And that's because my strategy has always been to add value to that property. And by adding value, it could be an older house where I need to do a renovation or put a granny flat on or do something where we'd usually get very hands-on back in the day. And do that ourselves or engage with the tradies ourselves. So
project manage.
If it's 8 hours away or I have to fly there, that becomes very difficult to project manage and control the quality of the work as well, because you want to make sure you get a great outcome with the contractors and tradies.
I'm the opposite of that, and you can see by my hands I don't work with my hands, so I don't actually do the reno. So I'd be very comfortable if I had a good buyer's agent and I did the research. I'd be very comfortable in buying a house regionally without having to look at it, look at it. I would be like, you look at photos or whatever, but I'd be comfortable to do so if the numbers stacked up. So, and I think there's a lot of success in that as well. There's a lot of people that do that successfully, but I'd love to go there and pop a bottle of champagne and have a look around as well if I can. I just don't need to go. I don't need to be able to drive past it and have a look.
No. Well, my partner did that, and his advice he got in his property buying journey was that if it's an investment, like, and this is, maybe silly advice, but it did kind of stick with me of like, if you're buying it purely as an investment, it's almost better to not go there, like not have an emotional attachment to the property.
That's interesting.
If you're someone like that, because like me, I'm create attachment to things. I'm very emotive, all that sort of stuff. So like if I went to a house, even if I bought it as an investment, I'm instantly thinking like, oh, this is what I would do here and this is how I want it to look. And like, it would be really personal to me, but you've got to sort of, again, this is just general, but like switch that mindset to be like, this is an investment. So it doesn't matter if I would live here or not, because that's not why I've bought it. I've bought it because of X, Y, Z, and
Or you go there and they haven't cut the grass in a while, and you see it's not presented how you want it to be presented.
Separate.
That's the thing. I had a house that I was renting out that we have since sold. I would drive past it every time I was in the area. I'd drive past it.
That would stress me out.
Like, oh, what are they doing there?
I have to be far away. I have to be far
I'm just
away.
sitting at the front of the house.
Ooh, brother. Ooh.
I knew you would work that into this episode.
I had a feeling they're going to work that in, and they both
that,
would
brother?
I've been waiting for this the whole
Cut the
time.
grass, brother.
Yeah.
If you are liking what you're hearing so far and you haven't checked us out on socials yet, then make sure you do it, because we share behind the scenes insights and exclusive takes that don't make it into the full episode.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point, Zaz, is so for your partner, how did he do his research to purchase interstate?
So he engaged with I think it was a buyer's agent, I believe, or like a property investment club.
Probably Spruker.
Right.
Yeah.
Spruker.
Probably. It sounded kind of dodgy when he was explaining it to me, but all legit. But basically this person was living a expert in that area. They went to the property, they took videos, they, ensured all the relevant inspections and checks and things were done on the property. But this is in Perth, we live in Sydney. So he's never seen it. He has no plans of ever seeing the property, ever going there. He's sight unseen, really. I mean, he saw videos and photos and things like that.
I think the buyer's agent's important, but you also need to do your own research, right?
And he did a lot. That's the thing.
He
He is obsessed, does so much reading, so much research.
But
watches a lot of YouTube videos, listens to a lot of podcasts.
You need to understand what the buyer's agent's telling you. So you can't outsource education, you can outsource research. So because there's a lot of good buyer's agents out there. There's a lot of spruker, shit buyer's agents out there that are going to sell you rubbish. So you need to know the difference between the two, and you need to be comfortable with what they're presenting to you and understand what they're presenting and believe that what they're showing you is going to work.
Yeah.
You probably want to look at different agents for different areas. There are some that are very national focused, but there might be some, if you're saying, hey, I want to invest in Southeast Queensland, there would be specific buyer's agents that live and breathe the area and understand it every day. So you want to look for the right agent as well. So you asked us what we would do with that, first home buyer, 550K budget, or what?
Yeah, first, if you're buying an investment property, so purely for an investment, and I think, Jace, we were talking yesterday, let me know if I'm wrong here, the average amount...
Oh, the loan amount? 619,000, I think.
For an investment property.
For an investment.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, hypothetically, that's your budget, and it's an investment, you're not going to live in it.
Yeah.
What would
budget
you
around
consider?
600K. If it's my first investment, the first question that, Jason asked, I think is a good one, is this for yield or is this for growth? And I think if it's your first investment and your attitude and your goals is to, potentially have more than one investment, then I'd be looking for growth would be the thing. So I want to make sure that, maybe it's going to cost me a couple $100 every week or $1,000 every month to service this loan, but, I can buy it for 600 today, and it might be worth 800, in the years to come, and I can use that equity to buy again. So I'd be, sorry, ask the question.
So on that though, my understanding with from when I used to do my research back in the day, regionals, and again, I'm not going to break it up into mining town or beachfront, but regional versus urban areas like Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, capital growth is generally seen in the urban/metro areas. And the regional centres or regional properties have been seen to be sometimes cash flow positive properties. But the capital growth may not be there.
And that's a typical assumption, right? And I think that's a typical assumption. But Jason just told us was going to buy a property in Dubbo for 350, and a few years later,
I get you, but that's after COVID. And look, the rule book we always say this, the rule book's been thrown out of the door after COVID. And I think, I think every property across Australia during COVID from 2019 to now has gone up 20, 30, sometimes 40%.
Yeah,
so
but
I've got some data on the CoreLogic home value index, if that is at all helpful. So this is from November 2023. So it's the most recent data on the home value index. So at a broad level, the combined regional index was up 0.7% compared with a 0.9% rise across the combined capitals. So it is slightly higher, I guess, in how home values are changing. And I don't know whether that's over a year period or, but the trend of higher growth in the capitals was evident across every single state in Australia. So capitals are seeing capital cities, capital markets, I guess, are seeing more growth.
Yeah, so Chris, you're not wrong. When you're talking about in general, say trend-wise, metro versus regional. But I think the key here is that, for example, this particular scenario, 600K, budget. You've got to look at the type of property, because it's not just areas that have different potential for capital growth. It's different types of property have different potential for capital growth as well. So if you're a first-time investor that you're starting, and I think this just highlights the point, is that if you oversimplify it, you're not going to get the right answer and you're going to make the wrong decision.
Yeah. So 600K in Sydney buys you an apartment.
Correct.
In the outer suburbs.
It can buy you some houses. Yeah. You just got to look.
Potentially, 600K in Adelaide buys you a pretty nice house, close to the city, big block, right? So I'm not saying Adelaide over. I'm not suggesting, we can't give financial advice. Trying to do the comparison. But maybe the house in Adelaide is going to grow better than the apartment in Sydney.
So I understand that. Yeah. But again, traditionally, it's been like we need to look. I'm not generalizing, but traditionally, and this is.
No, you are generalizing. Over Sydney, many years, metro versus regional.
Over many years, it's seen capital growth has been in the urban centres, and that there's data there for that, and then versus cash flow positive. Having said that, there are other locations. Like if a new mine opens up in Broken Hill, that's going to create a huge demand for properties in Broken Hill. That's just what.
But back to Jason's point, yes, on an overall, metro usually grows faster than regional. Yeah. But breaking it down to types, areas, like you really got to get granular. If you're looking at purchasing, you can't just say, hey, metro's better because, like, what are you buying in the metro area is important. You got to get granular, like you're saying, Jace, right? That's
exactly right. So I think when you have these questions around, is it this or that? That's actually a really good conversation starter or place for you to start your research. That's not your conclusion.
Do not end there.
Correct.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
So you can start looking into it, and you may find out, for example, Chris, with what you're saying, is that, the metro areas have greater capital growth, and my goal is for capital growth because I'm young, my income's going to increase, but it's going to hard for me to increase my savings. Yep. So I need that capital growth to invest again, or I need that capital growth to help me use the equity to fund my next purchase for the home that I'm going to live in with my partner. So capital growth to me is absolutely very important because I'm living at home at the moment. I can afford to be out of pocket even $300 a week, for example. But if I'm going to get 50 grand capital growth year on year, this is the right investment.
That's a good point too. Sorry, the living. If you're living at home, it's personal circumstance.
It is.
If you're living at home, you can be out of pocket. That's fine,
Yeah.
But if you're rent vesting, then all of a sudden the yield's important. You need to make sure that what you're getting back is similar to what you're putting in, so that you can have a certain lifestyle. So again, it comes back to like, what is your priority? What is your goal? Are you investing to get into the property market, just to get into the market and start your property journey, but you need to live somewhere. So therefore, you need to be able to
rent vesting.
That's right. That's right.
Or are you living at home? Are you lucky enough to be living at home, not have as many expenses, and you can go for the growth?
Yeah.
So it's so important to ask
That's exactly right. And it's really good to have challenging points. So for example, because sometimes if you have a bias and say you start the research and you already think, regional is good for me, it's got better cash flow, the capital growth has been great historically, from pre-COVID to now, it's affordable. But if nobody actually then challenges you around, hey, just hold on a second, this and that. Is that? Yeah, right. Then you're just going to keep going down the path of research to support your own bias.
Totally.
But if somebody actually challenges you, so someone that, for example, you respect, whether that's a buyer's agent or another professional or a friend who's invested in property, both regional or metro, right, then that's really going to help you think about, you know what, maybe I should look into that. Now, for example, you can buy a house in metro areas for $600,000. I don't necessarily have to go buy a $500,000 property in regional New South Wales.
Well, that's
Let's look at both.
A big challenge. I think people think that you can't buy a house, and we'll get to some points. You can't buy a house in an urban area, in Metro Sydney, right?
Yeah.
For under 600, where you definitely can.
Yeah.
But to go into that point about going deeper into it, I think circling back to what Zaz was asking about, what makes a region investable? So you talk on urban areas, so things like amenities and transport and being around good schools and particularly employment opportunities in urban. So what makes a region a good area? So what makes a region investable in your opinion? So we've gone past the whole capital versus investment cash flow perspective. What makes a region a good investment area?
So I believe one of the biggest things you need to look at is that region's ability to attract people, right? Because if you need to be able to, if you're buying an investment, You need to rent that out. You need people to want to live there, right? It's very important. So you look at places, and we saw in the late 90s, there were areas in, like, say, in Newcastle and Wollongong that were very reliant on mining, and those mining companies left, and it really hurt those areas for a little while.
Wollongong in particular.
Yeah, it hurt those areas for a little while. Exactly right. So at the time, that was no good. Now, those areas have reinvigorated themselves. Newcastle has become a regional hub for the Hunter area. So people want to live there, they want to work there. There's infrastructure, there's hospitals, there's, you know, this whole like winery region around them. They've got beaches. So they've reinvigorated themselves, maybe through tourism as well. And Wollongong has done the same, right? It's a beach town. So if you can't afford to live in Cronulla, maybe you look at Wollongong because it's not too far. So these areas are attracting people again, and they've made them, they're actually like the affordability of Newcastle. You know, you think about, is a regional town affordable? Mate, Newcastle's getting expensive. And anyone who purchased in Newcastle in the last 10 years is pretty happy with that decision, right? So you need to look for people. Where are people going? Where do people want to be? And that's where we talk about infrastructure, hospitals, schools, jobs. Jobs are important. And that's why the work from home phenomenon has been huge. Because if I can work from home, but I can live in Byron Bay, then that drives me to the region. That might drive me to the regional areas. So that's for me.
I like the sentiment of when you say growth, population growth, right? So look at the centres that have a population growth, but I think you probably need to dig a layer deeper as to why people are moving there. So again, I in my head I have the mining side of things versus beach town versus what's happening in that town. Why are people deciding to move there? Is there a new university that's gone in there, and there's a lot of young students going there, so they need accommodation. That's a really good one. From a university point of view, but what is the underlying factors for population growth? And as we know, population growth in an area is going to drive up demand for housing, whether it's rental or purchasing of property, which makes, if the rents are going up, it makes the investment in the regions more popular. So I agree with that point on the population side of things, looking into that. Why would people go there? The other part which comes with population is the employment opportunities. So that's a huge one. For the region. So making sure that there's sufficient employment opportunities in those locations. And you talk of, again, in my head, I think of regions. Newcastle to me it doesn't feel like a country town.
No way.
When I think of a region, I still got this image of a country town, and the hay bowls going across. But Newcastle to me is a booming city. It's same as Gold Coast. It's not to the extent of Gold Coast yet, but these are booming cities. And the employment opportunities in Newcastle are fantastic. So I think of, the population growth and what employment opportunities are there. I don't know if you've got some additional ones, Jace.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I don't think I have anything to add. Like, I think the fundamentals are the same. Even if you're looking at metro, if you're looking at regional, whether you're looking at interstate. So I think what drives the demand is typically the same. So I think what's important is you look at the data, the trends. I know you've mentioned mining town a couple of times. I mean, that's an obvious red flag. So anything that's temporary is dangerous.
How do the banks look at those towns? Like from a lending perspective?
From experience, when things were going well, the banks didn't have any particular issues. It's only when, let's say, the mine's about to close down, people are moving away from that area, say the landlords or the property investors are not able to make their repayments, then it goes on the radar. Because it is hard to say, for example, it's not the bank's job to say that mine's going to last for 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, it could go for longer. So the loan's typically 30 years. But at the same time, I think if the risk is not so obvious, then they don't really have an issue. But once it happens, then it's on their radar, so they'll be a lot more cautious when, for example, you're buying a property and you need a loan in an already established mining town.
So interesting, because we look at like a real example is Perth in Western Australia, which during the mining boom exploded, crazy, right? Like in crazy rents, and it just grew so much.
Iron ore boom.
Iron ore boom, and then once the mines started to close down, or we were out of that boom, Perth dropped dramatically. And, it's been pretty sort of stable for a while. There's still,
may not be cool, but there's still a mining boom happening in
But all of a sudden, everyone's talking about Perth again. If you listen to buyers agents and you look at property.
Yeah. But you look at and this is way off topic, but you look at iron ore prices, and that's because it's still elevated. So those operations happening, lithium's now a new sort of area on the mine. So that's to the mining sector in Western Australia.
So I guess what I'm asking is, why is Perth being spoken about again? Is it because we're all talking about Southeast Queensland and now that's too expensive, so we need the next thing? And if that's the case, then what's the next hotspot going to be?
Western Australia split itself from Australia during COVID?
It's another country now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that could
country of Western Australia
be because it's a rising market.
Yeah.
Right, so you know how there's the property clock, so it's just like a normal clock.
No, I don't know how there's a property clock. What's this?
So the property clock is, say, for example, a normal analog clock. For those who don't know what an analog clock is.
So that's the one with the hands,
yeah,
right?
with the hands.
Old school.
1 to 12. So 12 is at the top. Yeah. So 12 is at the peak of the market. Right. So if you go from the direction from 12 to 1, 2, 3 towards 6 at the bottom of the market. Okay. Right. So that's like the market's declining. So the demand's going away. And from 6 to 12 is when the market's rising. So when people talk about buying property, when is a good time to buy property?
Can we dig into this clock for a sec?
Yeah.
Who determines this clock? Who says where the hands are at a particular point in time?
Yeah, so you've got, say, research firms or valuation firms. So Heron Todd White, I think, will publish a paper on a quarterly basis for each state where they think that particular state is on the property clock. So, for example, it's for that state, it's at the trough. It's at 6 o'clock. So it's at the bottom of the market. So what they anticipate is from here onwards for the next, say, 3 to 6 months, the prices are going to start to recover and pick up. So this may be a good time to buy into that particular area.
These are organisational clocks? Can they differ from company to company?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's, for example, market analysts about you should sell that share or you should buy that share. So it's people in the industry analysing based on the data, making their own predictions. This area is, or this state or this area is a good time to buy.
Yeah, so it's just based on their opinion, and they're using that like
they're backed by some data.
Yeah, well, I was about to ask,
big valuation firm.
Correct.
What indicators would suggest that a market is at the bottom of the market?
Yeah, so they will look at the typical indicators around infrastructure, population trends, so forth. So they don't just come out with like a JPEG of the clock that says that Perth or WA is here.
Yeah.
Right. It'll come out with a report.
Yeah.
And the report will talk about trends, and all the banks do these reports too, but they just don't necessarily pinpoint to say it's at 7 o'clock. We've seen some recovery in the market, and the trend is going back up to the peak.
And it's up to you as a research buyer to say, okay, where do I think Perth is?
That's right. That's
at
right.
the moment on the clock.
That's right. So going back to your question, why is Perth so popular at the moment? So if you think about it, pre-COVID, Perth prices were falling.
Yeah.
So now it's been recovering since COVID.
Yeah.
And that's why the prices are affordable. Right. So during the booms, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago that you're talking about, the prices were really high. So when the mining slowed down a bit, the prices came down.
Yeah.
And it was negative growth quarter on quarter.
For a long time.
Yeah, so I still remember hearing about it in the news, like Perth, oh my gosh, it's the only property market in Australia that's going backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I remember hearing that about some towns in Queensland, so even Gold Coast.
Yeah.
I had my brother-in-law, he purchased property in Queensland, so in Labrador. He had a property as a 2-bedroom apartment, I believe, for the better part of 11, 12 years. And it was cash flow positive, but it did nothing in terms of capital growth for that whole period. And recently, or a while back, pre-COVID he sold, and it's gone bananas since then. Right? So some markets in Queensland had very similar. They had almost flat growth. But now we all know what's happened during COVID with Queensland, with internal migration from other states to Queensland.
Yeah.
And also, massive infrastructure that's happened. And the Olympics that's coming up in 2032. So really big boom in infrastructure. So that's another good example of what's happening in a location. So the Olympics is another huge one to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting too, like you got places like Darwin, which are very stagnant for periods of time, then they go up.
Yeah.
And then they're stagnant for periods. This is historically, right?
Yeah.
So the property clock becomes really interesting because you're going, if you can time the moment that, which is very hard to do.
Yeah, very hard.
But if you can time, so maybe everyone's talking about Perth at the moment. Is Perth going up? Is it a good time to get into Perth? Or should you be looking for the next one? Should you, or I don't know. I think you should be looking for long-term rather than like little peaks and troughs.
Yeah, so I think some of the things you look for that are the fundamentals, they don't change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if for example, in that particular state, in that particular area or region, in that particular suburb, there's always been a good demand. Like, for example, school catchments and stuff like that don't really change. So if you look at that, you're buying in an area where the school's really popular. So let's say the shopping's really convenient. There's good industry. That stuff typically doesn't change too much.
Yeah.
So if the prices have been going up because of that, it's likely that they continue to increase because of increased population and migration as well.
So on this property clock, is there like a digital version for simple people like me, or is it just the analog version?
Yeah, I don't do analog. I don't do analog.
Still learning to read the analog clock.
I actually had to put my Apple Watch onto analog setting the other day just because I was like, oh, I can't
but it
read
is
a
pretty
clock.
cool. You know, we can probably share like a link to the Her and Todd White.
Yeah, PJ, we should clip that.
In the notes or something like that.
The property clock.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
So are there any other factors that you think for regional? Because there's one other that I was thinking of, like, again, regional, again, lucky country, Australia, the best country in the world, but we have bushfires and floods as well. So there's locations in the regions where this happens, and sometimes, I remember 2019, the fires, but there's been fires since the beginning of time here in Australia. So, is that another consideration?
Oh, definitely. I think on that topic, it means insurance policy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the cost of your insurance is going to affect your cash flow on holding that property. So, for example, if you bought $600,000 property in metro suburbs, but far out from the city, your insurance might be $2,000 a year. But if you bought the same property, in the regional area, it might be $5,000.
Yeah, but it could also be uninsurable as well. So that's 100%. Something to look at, because they may actually say the insurance companies might blacklist an area to say they don't insure, and you take your own risk buying that property. So that's something to look at.
There was that period where we had the once in 100-year floods twice.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
But that's like in the Hawkesbury, right? Some of the properties are uninsurable on the river there. So you've got to really be careful.
Yeah, we actually had a customer buy an investment property in Queensland. I can't remember the suburb. Like, it wasn't regional; it was metro. The insurance premium was $20,000 a year. And I thought the customer heard wrong, and it was confirmed it was $20,000 a year.
Wow.
But it turned out when he shopped around, other insurers were insuring the property for $2,000 a year. And when he asked the original insurer, "Why is it $20,000?" they basically couldn't explain it to him because they said, "We just put in the info." And the computer said, "Oh wow, it's $20,000."
Computer says no.
So there must be things built in the background for the risk assessment. So that particular underwriter or insurance company saw particular risks in this particular area, for example, or there might be some error. But it was
maybe
literally
they've got policies in that area they're already exposed. They don't want to take
$20,000.
That's a lot of money.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And he actually purchased it because he thought, that's what it is.
He purchased a $20,000 insurance.
But then he looked and shopped around again, cancelled it because you got a cooling off period, and took out the $2,000. But imagine how much that'll affect your holding cost of that proproperty.
So did he know this before he purchased, or after he'd purchased and then he found this out?
After he purchased.
So what was it? Do you know what it was renting for? Are you able to say that?
I think it was renting for like $700-800 a week. Yeah, okay. It's a fully detached house on a nice, decent block.
So that $20,000, that $18,000 difference, that's like over half his rent.
Money.
Yeah. Well, there's stories on Current Affair about people saying that the homes that they live in regional areas, the insurance is $30,000. So, but they have no other option because that's the only insurer, for example, that will insure the property.
Wow.
So you either move, and then it becomes hard to sell that property because you kind of got to disclose that, right? Or I feel you should to someone who's going to buy it.
So many things you have to think about.
Yeah, but they're kind of stuck now. So imagine that's your home, and now your insurance premium has gone up from a couple of grand to tens of thousands. Yeah. What do you do then?
Well, and then there is, so if in contracts when you're purchasing properties, the councils of that area usually give you a statement. It varies in name per council. A statement attached to the back of the property which says if this land is in flood zone or in a bushfire zone. So that's something to look out for.
Yeah.
In regional, and to be honest, in urban areas as well, that can occur in urban areas, particularly flood zones. So have something to have a look at from a regional versus urban perspective. But there's a lifestyle difference, right, in regions. Yeah. Surely. Like, again, I'm going to use the Berry versus suburbs in urban areas, lifestyle location. There's an obvious lifestyle difference. And again, if we use that studio apartment in Surrey Hills versus the 5-bedroom house in Dubbo, which is probably on 1,000 square metre block, there's an obvious lifestyle difference.
Yeah. You can get cinnamon donuts anywhere, but those Berry Van donuts.
Yeah. Well, and I feel I know more and more people who live in the Central Coast that work in the city, and they're happy to drive 2 hours each way just for that lifestyle.
I've seen that too.
Because on the weekends.
Look, if you can get to, like, you know, driving from the Central Coast to Sydney, you can do it in an hour and a bit.
But because of the infrastructure, that tunnel under, you know, Penny Hills Road, that's saved 30, 40 minutes for some people.
Whereas, you know, if you're living on the outskirts of Sydney, that could be an hour and a bit a week as well. So, you know, again, what's the difference? What's the difference?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And then there's less congestion, and on the weekends, the beaches are everywhere, easily accessible. Yeah. And that goes back to the lifestyle.
Yeah, I'm moving.
And I think that's where the demand comes from.
The lifestyle becomes interesting because you talk on that point, driving down the highway, thinking of Gosford as a particular area. Gosford's been unloved for years, but now with the introduction of that tunnel, which shaves heaps of time for people that might be driving from Gosford into town, into Sydney for work, that saves heaps of time. So that then people go, well, you know what? I can move to Gosford. It's more affordable. I can move to Gosford, and that's a decision where people have moved out, and it could be a great investment.
Gosford's a good example. They've got the hospital. You know, there's a bit of a facelift happening in Gosford at the moment as well.
And they're building apartments and stuff, right?
Yeah. There's some high-rise going there, some hotels going in.
Yeah, so very interesting.
Iguana Joe's is still closed though. So
is Iguana Joe's closed?
Yeah. What is that?
I never went, but I just see it every time you drive past. You know,
like a club.
What was it?
It was like
club. Tropicana, was that a thing? Is that a thing? All the footy players.
Getting a real
insight into in Newcastle.
These guys.
Fanny's in Newcastle.
I feel like I missed a what?
Fanny's in Newcastle.
Right.
It was a club name.
Can we say that on a podcast?
Watch your mouth, Chris.
I think our property clock is up here.
Well, that's
12 o'clock.
That's as good as time as any. We're in the trough. We're in the trough.
We're in the mud.
Well, guys, as always, another good combo. I think sort of summing up to answer Jonah's question, if you're looking at regional or capital cities, I guess our answer would be it's not that simple.
It depends.
Yeah, it depends. But I liked what you said, Jace, of that it could be a good sort of jumping off point to start a conversation with a mortgage broker.
Absolutely.
Because if it leads you to investigate, okay, well, why would you consider regional? Why would you consider capital city? And then you kind of work backwards from there almost to work out what's important to you. So I think, the advice, as always, is seek expert advice, personalised advice, think about your goals, especially with investment property, what's your long-term strategy? And it's not just as cut and dry as capital cities or regional. Both might work for you.
It's not as cut and dry as capital growth versus just income.
Yep.
Right? It's getting deep into it. And I like what you said about the goals, really figure out your goals. Mike, you mentioned about if your goal is to live somewhere and rent vest, if you live in that's a really important to really dig into your goals.
Yeah.
And again, I always say, take property, don't look at it in 2 or 3 years' time. It needs to be a long-term vision and plan with property. Even if that means rent vesting, what's your plan there? So look at your goals.
I agree. What's your goal? Get granular, get some advice with someone you can trust, and then go. Make a decision. Do it.
Did you like Dubbo because of the zoo? The zoo there, Jace?
It's a great zoo.
It is a good zoo.
Oh,
great zoo.
Yeah.
It's not new, but it's been there for a while, but it's great.
I've never been, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
You got to.
Do you look at zoos? So that's the thing.
Probably would have gone if I bought that property there.
Train stations, schools, hospitals, zoos. Yeah.
Let's go to the zoo.
Why not?
And then check out the property and see if they mow the lawn.
Let's do a Property Now regional tour. We'll go Donut Van, Dubbo Zoo. Let's do it.
It's all these tyres doing out the front of the house. Ooh.
Cut it, Paige. Yeah.
Cut it. Thanks, guys. The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.